Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. And so what I want to do is go ahead and give you my preseason college football prediction, college football playoff predictions. That's right, every single person in the college football media is doing it. But as I just told you, a year ago, I told you to pick Georgia. How about my dogs? And I was dead right. So everybody can give out picks. Let's see if I can do as well as I did this time last year, where I picked the eventual national champion, a team that not very many picked going into the season. This is what I want to do. I'm going to give you my 4 playoff teams. I will give you matchups from there and who I have winning the national championship. First of all, in the number 1 seed, let's get to my college football playoff predictions. Number 1 seed. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. It is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I have talked about Alabama so much on this show over the last couple weeks. I'm not going to go through the depth chart player by player. At this point, you know what Alabama has, specifically at the star level positions. Bryce Young, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, is back at quarterback after, again, winning that Heisman Trophy, 47 touchdowns a year ago, 47 touchdown passes, I should say, a year ago. Will Anderson is a star on defense. And I think, again, I've mentioned all of the transfer portal stuff. Jermaine Burton, wide receiver from Georgia. Jahmyr Gibbs, running back from Georgia Tech. So I'm not going to go through the entire roster. But what I would say about Alabama, the thing that keeps standing out to me, and I cannot emphasize this enough, there have been years where I believe that Alabama comes into the regular season as the best team in college football. There's been quite a few of them over the last 15, 16 years since Nick Saban got to Alabama in 2007. But rarely have they had, in my opinion, the clear best team in college football with a very clear chip on their shoulder. And so that is the difference to me in this season. Almost like what we saw in 2020 2 years ago. If you remember 2 years ago in college football, that was the COVID year. But in 2019, LSU wins the national championship. Ironically, Alabama plays them as tough as anybody. Tua goes down, Tua plays in that game, but he's far from 100%. And I think Alabama went into that offseason saying, we believe if we were healthy, we were as good as LSU last year. So let's leave no doubt they did it. They had a historic season in the COVID year, and I believe it can be much the same. One, I don't think there's any doubt that Bryce Young has more weapons this year than he has ever had before at any point in his career. And when I say that, I really mean last year. Last year kind of had a between-the-tackles runner in Brian Robinson, one great wide receiver in Jamison Williams, another very good wide receiver in John Mechie, who unfortunately is going through some very serious medical issues right now. We're all thinking about him. But when I look at Alabama this year, I just think there's going to be more weapons for Bryce Young. And it was interesting because Nick Saban was on Colin Cowherd's show on Thursday. And the one thing he said that stood out to me was that Bryce Young to him is more of a point guard than a quarterback, that he's great at getting everybody involved. And so now you give him a deeper set of weapons. That is scary to me in terms of the college football playoff. To keep it going and to take it a step further, I think, as weird as this sounds, this could be one of Nick Saban's best defenses. Remember, first of all, they were top 10 nationally last year in total defense, so it's not as though they weren't already very good. But on top of that, they bring back 8 starters. Most of them are going to be early round draft picks. I think you're talking about 3, maybe 4 starters on this defense will be drafted in the first round next year. Will Anderson, potentially number 1 pick. Eli Ricks, maybe the top cornerback off the board, transfer from LSU. Henry To'oTo'o, linebacker, transfer from Tennessee a year ago. Jordan Battle, a safety, is really good. So you look at all the talent that they have. Dallas Turner is only a sophomore. I think he'll be a top 10-ish type pick a year from now, actually in 2024. So I guess it would be 18 or so months from now. But it's not only an elite offense. This defense was top 10 nationally and brings back almost everybody. And so when I look at Alabama, as I said on Wednesday's show, I believe they're the best team in college football. I do believe there's a little bit of a gap between them and Ohio State at number 2. I look at the schedule. I think it's actually, by SEC standards, pretty hard. First of all, you got the out-of-conference game at Texas. I wouldn't really worry about that if I was a Bama fan. Texas is whatever. But then in conference, you have to play at Tennessee, improving team, fast-paced offense, not going to be easy. You have to play at LSU, which is a rivalry game. Maybe by then Brian Kelly has things rolling, although LSU obviously has a lot of work to do just between now and early November when they would play Alabama. You do also have to play early in the season, and I think this is worth noting. They've played them late the last few years. But at Arkansas, that game comes a week before Texas A&M. And so I bring it up. Could they possibly be looking forward to Texas A&M when they could get a top 25 Arkansas team on the road in Fayetteville? And then also Ole Miss, which is obviously really good, and Lane Kiffin to some degree has given Nick Saban fits since he got there. So I think the schedule is tough. I don't really worry that much for this particular Alabama team, though, that has a major chip on their shoulder. I think they go to Atlanta undefeated. I think they take care of Georgia in the SEC championship game. I think Alabama enters the college football playoff as the number 1 overall seed. Number 2 overall seed, another team that I have talked about a lot, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Yes, I have Ohio State at number 2. Alabama is my 1 seed. Ohio State is number 2, and the reasons why are obvious. They're going to have the best offense in college football, and it's no disrespect to Bryce Young and those guys, USC, Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams. But when I look at Ohio State, number 1 total offense in college football last year, 561 yards per game scored. On top of that, 561 yards per game, not scored. They didn't score that many, but they had 561 yards per game. Then also 45 points per game last season at Ohio State. And this is a team that, again, they put up a lot of points against a lot of people, and they bring back basically the entire offense. C.J. Stroud at quarterback. There's a reason this guy is the favorite to win the 2022 Heisman Trophy. In the sports books and in the betting odds, he is the favorite. Completed 72% of his passes, 44 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. But then on top of that, the skill position talent around him is insane. Trevion Henderson, the running back, mentioned it the other day. Similar numbers as a freshman to Maurice Clarett. We remember Maurice Clarett, that historic freshman season for him on the way to leading Ohio State to a national championship. Trevion Henderson basically put up the identical numbers. I know it's a new world. I know it's a different type of offense, obviously much, much more advanced under Ryan Day. Saying that you're in the same breath as an Ohio State running back as a freshman, as Maurice Clarett, is only a good thing. And then the wide receiver core. Look, it's the best in college football. It's the best in college football, no doubt. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think, is a Heisman dark horse, as I discussed last week. Garrett Wilson is gone. Chris Olave is gone. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the focal point, and he was already the best wide receiver on this team. But what's crazy is the 2 guys that I just mentioned, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, they're gone. Top 15 picks in the last NFL draft. You just replace them with other really talented players. Marvin Harrison Jr., yes, the son of the Hall of Famer Marvin Harrison. Emeka Ibuka, the number 1 wide receiver in the high school class of 2021. This receiver room is loaded, and that's why I think Ohio State makes the college football playoff. That offense is just going to be so explosive. I am a little bit worried about the defense. I am a little bit worried about the schedule. But a couple things stand out when I think about that. First off, you look at the defense. Yes, I'm very concerned about the defense. As I told you, they were ranked 60th in the country last year. But that offense is going to be so good that if Ohio State can be even incrementally better, not elite, just incrementally better, I don't even think most of these games are going to be close because the offense is going to be so good. And the schedule, I will say, does worry me a little bit. On top of the fact that I do think, that the defense needs to be better, schedule is pretty tough. Obviously, you get Michigan. That is a rematch of last year's loss. That game is in Columbus for Ohio State. But they open with Notre Dame. They play Michigan at home to end the season. In between, it's worth noting, they have to go to Penn State, which has given them trouble in the past. They have to go to Michigan State, which is obviously an improving program under Mel Tucker. And also, they get 2 cross-division games with 2 really tough programs, Wisconsin and Iowa. Now, the benefit is both of those games are at home. The Wisconsin game has already been announced, I thought it had been announced. It's been announced as an ABC game, which to me means it's almost certainly an evening game. But I do think at some point Ohio State is going to have some loss along the way Because of it, I have Ohio State as the number 2 seed, but the top-ranked one-loss team in college football going into the playoff on the strength of the schedule, on the strength of the fact that we are talking about a team that is going to play 5 teams ranked in the preseason top 25 going into the season. They are going to play Notre Dame to open the season. Notre Dame's number 5 in the country. They're going to play later in the year Michigan State ranked number 15, Wisconsin number 18. I forgot to mention Michigan number 8, and also Iowa, which I guess Iowa just missed the top 25, Penn State as well. So 4 top 25 opponents plus Penn State plus Iowa. I think they take a loss somewhere along the way. I don't believe that there's anyone in the Big Ten that will ultimately surpass them, though, in terms of winning the division, beating them in the Big Ten championship game. By the way, just for fun, I do have Purdue winning the Big Ten West. Not that it means very much. I think Ohio State wins comfortably the Big Ten, and they go back to the college football playoff after missing it last year. Number 3, a team that I talked about a lot on Wednesday's show, and a team that I feel like I'm the only one that I believe in. I'm the only one. So Oklahoma Sooners fans, go ahead. I'm driving the bandwagon. You get on board. You let Torres drag you to the finish line, baby. I really like Oklahoma coming into this year. Now, I think most of the presumption is that Oklahoma is going to take a major step back without Lincoln Riley. And I do think, I think there's a lot of revisionist history with Lincoln Riley. And, this idea that he didn't build the program and he didn't do this and he didn't do that. I wouldn't quite say that Bob Stoops was totally on the hot seat when he got there. But the fan base was starting to turn on Bob Stoops. Lincoln Riley comes in. The offense blows up. He ends up becoming a head coach. And the program dominates the Big 12 from there. And so it did dominate towards the end of the Bob Stoops era. I'm not trying to take it away. But I think people are trying to take away what Lincoln Riley did at Oklahoma, and it was incredible. So that is the argument against Oklahoma. Here's my argument. The other argument, of course, is that Brent Venables is, of course, a first-year head coach. Now, my argument as far as that's concerned is this. It's not as though a first-year head coach has never made the playoff before. Ryan Day did it a few years ago. Lincoln Riley did it as the head coach at Oklahoma. Larry Coker, by the way, won a national championship a million years ago at Miami in his first year. So when I look at the history of college football, what the history of college football tells me is if there is a great infrastructure in place by a very good coach, in the case of Ohio State, it was Urban Meyer. In the case of Oklahoma, it was Bob Stoops. In the case of Miami, it was Butch Davis. If there's a good infrastructure with a good coach and good players, you can have immediate success in year one as a head coach, and I think that's exactly what Brent Venables is taking over. And another knock on Lincoln Riley is the idea that, he didn't recruit a team good enough to win the national championship. Now, part of it is on Lincoln Riley because he said on the way out that something to the effect of every year I went into the playoff, I had the 4th best team, so let's not shed any tears for Lincoln Riley. But here's kind of an interesting fact I don't think a lot of people realize, even though I've tried to tell you it on the Aaron Torres Sports podcast the last 3 or 4 weeks. Oklahoma, top 10 recruiting class in 2019, top 10 recruiting class in 2021, top 10 recruiting class in 2022, which credit to Brent Venables, he closed on that one. But why I bring that up is because of the fact that every single summer, a guy named Bud Elliott works for 24/7 Sports, kind of a college football recruiting hybrid guy, really talented writer, reporter, whatever you want to call him. Very talented guy. I want to give him credit for this. He created something called the blue chip ratio, where he essentially looks at all 4 or 5 recruiting classes, every player currently in your program, and tries to determine, based on the recruiting rankings, who has the most talent in college football going into a season. Probably the surprise of no one, Alabama's number 1. Probably the surprise of no one, Ohio State's number 2. Georgia falls back to number 3, if you want to call it falling back after losing all that talent to the NFL last year. But then number 4 is Oklahoma. And I think when you think of the most talented teams in college football, I think your first thought is probably outside of those top 3, maybe an LSU, maybe a Clemson, maybe a Texas. I don't think people immediately default to Oklahoma, but they are going to have the most talented roster in every game that they play. And the schedule breaks pretty nicely for them. They do play out of conference at Nebraska. As I said, we'll find out by the end of this weekend if Nebraska has really figured things out or if they're the same old Nebraska under Scott Frost. But in conference, they get Texas early as they always do, and we know how to feel about Texas. And then also on top of that, they get the 2 best teams probably in the Big 12 outside of Oklahoma. Oklahoma State and Baylor, both of those games at home. So I do think Oklahoma, I don't think they're so much more talented than everybody that they go undefeated in the regular season. I think they go 11-1. I think they go to the Big 12 championship game. I think they beat Oklahoma State for a second time in the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma will get into the college football playoff as a 12-1 Big 12 champ. Number 3 seed, obviously behind Ohio State because the schedule isn't quite as tough. Finally, the number 4 team. It is the team that was a trendy playoff dark horse that is no longer really trendy because everybody's picking them, but I do like them. It's the Utah Utes. Yes, Utah. Yes, the Pac-12 will be back. But when you actually start to break down Utah, there's a reason why so many people who love college football, like myself, are so high on Utah. Keep in mind, we spent all offseason talking about how great the Ohio State offense is, the chance that it has to be historically great this year in college football. I'm talking about Ohio State. Well, what was the last time we saw Ohio State on a football field? It was in the Rose Bowl against Utah, and Utah went score for score with Ohio State in the college football playoff. And so if Ohio State has a potentially historically great offense, and they went and Utah went score for score with them last year in the Rose Bowl, why can't Utah have one of the 2 or 3 best offenses in college football, especially when you consider what they did late in the year? Finished the year, by the way, top 20 nationally in scoring offense, and this was after a slow start in which they lost 2 of their first 3 games. Well, what happened after they lost 2 of their first 3 games? They benched the starting quarterback, a kid named Charlie Brewer. He immediately hits the portal. He's now playing for Hugh Freeze, friend of the Aaron Torres pod at Liberty, and they put in a kid named Cam Rising. Well, Cam Rising comes in. They win 9 of the 10 games in the regular season and Pac-12 championship with him under center. They go 9-2 overall, including that Rose Bowl, and the offense absolutely takes off. I looked it up, and this stat is pretty freaking incredible. In his the final 10 games of the season, after October 1st. Now, he took over a little bit before that, but the final 10 games with this kid under center, and he's back this year. Utah scored 34 or more points in 9 of their final 10 games, including the Pac-12 championship game in the Rose Bowl. So this isn't the 3 yards and a cloud of dust Utah offense. It's explosive. It's dynamic. They did lose their best wide receiver, Britton Covey, but they bring back Cam Rising. They bring back 1,000-yard rusher Trevion Thomas, and they bring back most of the offensive line. Now, defense, they did lose a decent amount, including their best defensive player, Devin Lloyd, first-round NFL draft pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars. But they still bring back a bunch of starters. They actually, you don't think of Utah as a portal team, but they did pretty good in the portal. They got a linebacker from Stanford named Gabe Reed, who was really good for them. Mohamed Diabate, a transfer from Florida, who was second on that team in tackles. So Utah, they're plugging holes in the portal like they're LSU or USC with a much better baseline. So I like them, again, to go 11-1 and win the Pac-12. What I will say, a couple things to keep in mind with Utah. The first thing is the schedule is really tough out of the gate, okay? So if you're making the argument against Utah, or even if you're making it for Utah, whatever you think of them, we're going to know everything there is to know about Utah by the middle of October, and here's why. Week 1, they play at Florida. So they fly cross-country next Saturday into the swamp. The game is at least at night for weather purposes. But they play Florida in week 1 of the college football season. First week, or early October, they play at UCLA. I am higher on UCLA than most. And then they also play USC on October 15th. So in the first 5 to 6 weeks of the season, by mid-October, they are going to play 3 teams that I believe are top 25 caliber maybe not. Florida's not quite top 25 caliber, but it's a road game in an SEC stadium. So you look at the schedule. We're going to know awfully quick if Utah is good, and then they do play Oregon late in the year. And keep in mind, they beat Oregon pretty darn bad twice last year, so you know Oregon's going to want revenge. I do have Utah as the 4th team in the college football playoff. Now, in terms of the matchups, that would obviously be Utah versus Alabama, 1 versus 4. And I think you probably know where I'm going with this. Listen, I love the Utah story. I think they're incredible. I think this game would probably on paper be closer than people expect. But what I would say about any potential matchup between Utah and Alabama is that Utah is a big, physical, tough team, and I think that would serve them well against a team like Alabama. But at some point, Alabama's just as big, just as physical, just as tough, and they just have more NFL bodies, more size, more athleticism. And that's what would concern me in a game like that. Utah, defensively, as good as they were last year, couldn't stop Ohio State. Ohio State just had NFL wide receivers and running backs all over the field. Well, now imagine Alabama taking the field in that exact same scenario, only they have the dudes on defense to back it up. So I'm not going to do crazy predictions here in the fall, or in the summer, excuse me. But if they play in the semifinal, I would guess Alabama wins somewhere in the neighborhood of 35-14 or something like that. Listen, we saw it last year in the college football playoff when Alabama played Cincinnati, and Utah's better than Cincinnati was last year. But at a certain point, Alabama's just so much bigger, better, and more physical than everybody else that they're just playing a different brand of football. And Cincinnati was so well coached, so well disciplined, they just didn't have the dudes to keep up. And that's kind of the sense that I would get of what would happen if Utah matched up with Alabama. In the other semifinal, I would have Oklahoma over Ohio State. I think most people would assume, well, Torres, got to be Ohio State, right? No. Actually, I'm taking Oklahoma. That is right. I am riding Boomer Sooner all the way to the national championship game. First of all, how goofy would it be? How goofy would it be if we got a scenario where Lincoln Riley keeps saying, I can't get over the hump, I can't get over the hump, I can't get over the hump, made the college football playoff with the fourth best roster every time I was there, and then Brent Venables takes all his players and gets there in year one? I think Oklahoma fans would have some fun with that. But two, it goes back to what I said. Give Brent Venables a month to prepare for this Ohio State offense. I think he's going to put a scheme together. Now, you go back 2, 3, 4 years, Ohio State played Clemson in the semifinal. That was the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence game. Not claiming that Oklahoma has an answer quite like Trevor Lawrence, but to Brent Venables' credit, he did a very good job of shutting down that Ohio State offense. They scored like 13 points in the first 3 possessions or something like that, and then were essentially held scoreless most of the rest of the game. Give Brent Venables time. I believe that Oklahoma would have enough to make a college football playoff national championship game. They would beat Ohio State in the semifinal. We'll say 20. How does 28-24 sound in that one, in what would be the lowest scoring game of Ohio State's season? And then finally, in the national championship game, I do have Alabama for all of the reasons that I have told you for all of these months now. I just look at this team. They're the most talented. They're the most, they're the most well coached. I mean, that's not a disrespect to Ohio State or Oklahoma or whatever. They're just really well coached. They have the most talent, and this is just a chip on their shoulder revenge tour type season. It's not often, as I said, that you get the best, most talented team in college football with a chip on their shoulder coming into that season, and that's exactly what Alabama is. And I do believe that when I look at Alabama, I just see a team, and I said it the other day, I think they are significantly better than everybody else in college football because of it. Alabama is my 2022 college football national champion. There were, by the way, 2 other teams that I really did have a very hard time leaving out of the playoff picture, and I'll explain why here. Not really a surprise on either one. I very much wanted to put Georgia into the college football playoff for this reason. It's because it's really hard to find a loss on their regular season schedule. And if you can't find a loss on their regular season schedule, then that means they're going to go to the SEC title game undefeated. And what it probably means is even if they lose to Bama, they would get back to the college football playoff. So I almost had Georgia in over Utah. But where I hesitated was, we all know college football. And even when you're really good, there are just days where it's just not your day, where you catch the wrong team on the wrong day at the wrong time, and where you get upset. And so I do think when you start stacking up everything that Georgia has lost since the start of last season, so many starters on defense, 5 first-round picks off the defensive side of the football, your two best running backs, Zamir White and James Cook, wide receivers, whatever. I just don't see them finishing the regular season undefeated. Now, they're going to be favored in every game. I think they're going to make certain teams look really bad. But I do think somewhere along the way, somebody is going to knock them off in a regular season game, even though I think they're still going to win the SEC East. And so if they go to the SEC championship game with one loss, then I do think it makes it harder for them to get into the college football playoff as a two-loss team because we've simply never seen it. So that was kind of my thought for keeping Georgia out. And I was really close on Clemson, too. I'll say this. Clemson, again, we talked about it on Wednesday's show. You look at everything that went wrong for Clemson last year. DJ's a complete disaster at quarterback. Your best running back gets hurt. A first-round NFL draft talent on the defensive line is out for the season after 3, 4, 5 games. And they still went 10-3. They won their final 5 regular season games. They won a bowl game. That was in the worst-case scenario. Here's why I can't pick Clemson to make the college football playoff. One, I just don't know about the quarterback, right? Like it's easy for Dabo now to say, DJ's our guy. He's so much better than he was last year. And even if Dabo means it, I'm not saying that he's lying about it. But even if he is not lying about it, is DJ going to be that improved to go 11-1 or 12-0 to make the college football playoff, especially when you consider a couple other things? One, Clemson lost both of its coordinators. Brent Venables, obviously the head coach at Oklahoma. Tony Elliott is now the head coach at University of Virginia. I was going to say Virginia Tech, but University of Virginia. And 3, the schedule is pretty tough by ACC standards. Now, they open against Georgia Tech in Atlanta on Labor Day weekend. They should win that game going away. But then you play at Wake Forest in late September. Wake Forest, of course, won 10 games last year, was the reigning ACC champ. You then play NC State the following week. NC State's a team that beat you last year. A lot of preseason buzz. They're in the top 15 nationally. You play at Boston College, at Florida State, 2 improved teams. Boston College has given you trouble in the past. We'll see about Florida State. And then you close at Notre Dame and Miami and South Carolina in the final 4 weeks of the season. So, you're talking about 7 or 8 really good opponents. And I think Clemson's going to be favored in every one of those games, but are you really going to win all of them or go 11-1 when we don't really know about your quarterback? You lost both coordinators. I just don't know. And so it goes back to what I said. Even if DJ's not the guy, if you have to make that move, by the time you make the move, you might already have a loss. And then you're actually believing that Cade Klubnik, the backup quarterback who's a freshman, is good enough to win you every single game you play the rest of the way. So Clemson, I just couldn't justify it. And the defensive talent might be the best in college football. The way we talk about Ohio State's offense, Clemson's defense got those kind of dudes on defense. Miles Murphy, Brian Brzee, Trenton Simpson. You go on and on down the list, but Clemson was left out. I'd probably put Clemson at number 5, Georgia at number 6, but those are my 4 college football playoff teams. Bama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Utah, Alabama beating Oklahoma in the college football playoff title game.